All right, folks, the Breweasy brew day is here, and I'm gonna brew on this thing today, and I'm gonna try to max out the basket and everything. I've got a imperial stout recipe that I made up for it, 18 pounds of grain. I did talk to one of the engineers. He thinks that's probably about the maximum that this system will hold. I did do a thorough cleanup of it, used some brewery wash, filled it up with some water, ran everything through there. I did get some good footage of the spray arm with the holes spraying out on it, cranked up the Riptide pump, and that thing, it sprays with a pretty good amount of force for sure. So did all that, ran the water through everything, ran the water through the cleaner through the chiller and all that stuff. Got everything ready for my brew day today. Added my RO water into my kettle, got all that in there, put all the salts in, everything is ready to go. I'm actually heating up the water right now. And so what I'm gonna do is, as soon as we get up to our 158 degree mash-in temperature, I'm gonna come back and we're gonna dough in and we're gonna see what this Breweasy is all about. All right, we're up to our 158 degrees. Let me turn this pump off so you can hear me a little better. Just a real quick overview of some of the things that I did to kind of prep for the brew day. There was no profile, obviously. I created a profile on Brewfather. I'll share that with the creators of Brewfather so we have it once I verify everything is good with this profile. But what I did was I actually determined that there is approximately 4 gallons of dead space outside of the basket. Yes, I said 4 gallons. What I did, I could have put the volume of the kettle into a calculator and then, measured the top and the taper and no, I didn't do any of that. So all I did was I stuck the basket into a trash bag and stuck it down in the kettle and started filling it up with water, and then watched the level of water rise on the side of the sight glass here. When it got up near the top, I pulled the basket out and just read what it was. It was really unscientific, but it's one of those practical things that actually worked really well. So that is the information on the dead space outside of the basket. And then I also did a dead space, or what's left behind, in the kettle after the kettle is drained, and that is 0.14 gallons. Now, of course, that doesn't count for trub or anything like that, but I just wanted to find out how much was left, because I know Blichmann does publish their dead space or their, what's left behind on their website, but this is a new dip tube, and I wasn't sure if it went all the way down to the bottom like the other one, so I wanted to just check it. So anyways, that's the information for you. The basket does sit at about 9.25 gallons, so that's about the maximum size or level of the kettle. So when I made the profile, I put it as 9.25 gallon kettle. And then I put the dead space, because I am trying to max it out, I put the dead space at 4 gallons on it. So I did do a recipe exactly 18 pounds of grain. And so we're gonna try to dough in on it and see what we get. As far as the strike water goes, it was 7.53 gallons, I think it was, or 7.53 or 3.5. I don't know, I'll have to look at I'll put it up here on the screen. So I'm gonna go ahead and kick off the element and hang the lid here. And we'll pull out the recirculation arm. And whoa, watch out there. Has a little bit of water left in it. So before I forget, I'm gonna go ahead and turn this down to 149, which is what my mash temperature is gonna be. And I'm gonna go ahead and get doughed in here. So let me grab my mash paddle. And let's do this. Try to make it so you guys can see it on camera here. All right, so let's get this thing doughed in and see what we get here. Gonna be pretty curious to see how much this thing holds. I actually had a conversation with Preston, one of the engineers. Shout out to Preston, one of the Blichmann engineers, kind of talking to him about what the maximums and everything were. And I don't know that they really know 100% what the maximums are. I talked to him about the minimum amounts as well, and he wasn't really sure. We think it's probably about 3 gallons just from what I did my calculations on, or where the probe is and all that stuff. So I think that's gonna be about right. And I know that the element does displace a little bit of the space in the kettle. So this said that I needed about a little over, I think it was about 8.75 gallons or something like that for this mash. Now, the interesting thing about this that Preston told me also was that with the way that the recirculation arm works, it doesn't really matter a whole lot if the mash is pretty thick, because it's recirculating through the entire mash itself. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to have grains going over into the... Whew, we're going to be really close here, I'll tell you what, that's for sure. We are really close. I've got probably a couple more pounds of grain. Let me set this down and try to get this stirred in, because we are right... I think 18 pounds is going to be the max, because we are right there at the maximum on this thing. Try to get all this grain saturated in here. We are right at the top of the basket here. And hopefully I can do this without any kind of dough balls or anything. This is really, really testing this, I believe. Whoop. Don't want to do that. Try to stir this from the outside into the middle. Keep all the grain in the basket if possible here. I think I'm probably going to wind up with a little bit of grain out there, but let me go ahead and get the rest of this in there. I'm just going to go for broke, and I'm going to put it all in there and see what we come up with. So we're going to test this thing for sure. Woo! I think I might be a little bit ambitious on the 18 pounds of grain, but we're going to give it a shot. It is full. Oh. So let's see here. Trying to get this in here without... Maybe 17 pounds is the max. I don't know. I'm trying to get this in here without getting grains out into the kettle. Yeah, that's pretty thick for sure. I think we're gonna get it though. I tell you, it's definitely thick. I think once we start the recirculation, there's gonna be a little bit of it won't pile up on top like the systems with the solid malt pipe, because of the fact that the mesh is completely open on the basket here. I'm just wanting to make sure they don't have any dough balls or anything to not get converted. But I think that the recirculation arm is going to actually take care of a lot of those dough balls and stuff. Well, it looks like we actually got, I think I got the 18 pounds of grain in here. I do see a few little speckles of some grain husk floating around, but I think we're probably okay. I don't want to stir this too vigorously because of the fact that I'm just afraid I don't want to get a bunch of grain over into the kettle. I think this stirring from the outside works pretty well. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm not going to wait. I'm just going to go ahead and stick the recirculation arm in there, and we're going to start recirculating. Let's see what happens. All right, we'll put it in there. And let's see here. It is full. Oh, that's for sure. There's a little bit of room just above the basket. It looks like my table's not 100% level. It looks like it might be leaning forward just a little bit. But it's full. I mean, it is really full. So let me go ahead and turn on the pump here. I'm going to turn on the controller, and then I'm going to turn on the pump. And let's see what happens here. Woo! All right. So what I saw, as soon as I turned it on, the grain started kind of clumping up a little bit. But it's kind of staying in the center, so it'll be interesting to see how this does. Woo! Now, Preston did tell me that the mash can kind of be a little bit dry at the outside edges of the basket, and see, like it's pretty liquid right in here. But when I go to the outside of the basket, it's a little bit drier. But he said he didn't have any issues with that being the case. But yeah, so the grain kind of mounded up a little bit whenever I cranked on the pump. And I've got it's pumping, let's see, maybe a half a gallon per minute or 3 liters per minute here based on this. Let me see if I can turn it up a little bit more. Well, I don't know if I dare turn it up any more than that, because it's kind of flooding the top of the grain here. Maybe as it gets absorbed a little bit more, it might do a little bit better, but it's, woo, it's full. 18 pounds is definitely the max. Now the water level has also dropped around the basket a little bit because it's kind of seemed like it's kind of mounding up in the grain a little bit, but we're definitely recirculating. All right, so this looks good. It's kind of mounded up a little bit, but I mean, we've got some space around the outside, so I'm just gonna let this thing run. I'm gonna put the lid on, and we'll be back here in about 15 minutes or so. I wanna check the pH on it just to see how that is, and I'll give you an update at that time. All right, so I'm back. I just took a reading on it, and my pH is right where I calculated it at, 5.3. I did do a brief little stir of the mash, and as you can kind of see, it's pretty loose in the center here. Now, one of the other things that I did too, just to try and see, you know, this is all about testing it and seeing what happens, I actually turned the pump like all the way up. And I think just due to the resistance of the grain around the recirculation pipe and everything, it's just sitting there right at that like 2 liters to half a liter per minute. I mean, it's definitely recirculating. There's no question about that. It's just, I think that all the grain around the pipe and everything is preventing it from going any higher than that. So it's definitely circulating. I can see liquid flowing through the grain and everything. The outside of the mash is a little bit drier, not dry, but it's a little bit thicker, let's say it's thicker than the rest of the mash in the center. But I certainly think that this is working well. So you can kind of see there that around the edges it's a little bit thicker for sure. So, but so far so good. So it seemed like it's doing the job. So we're gonna let it mash for a little longer. I'm gonna do an hour-long mash on this thing, just see what kind of efficiency we get and everything. So we'll be back in a little bit. All right, so here we are. We've come to the end of the mash. I did mash for an hour and then raised it up to 170 degrees for the mash out. And I took a gravity reading along the way with my Brewing America 155 degree calibrated hydrometer, like a mash hydrometer. And I think it was right around 1.070. My pre-boil, according to Brewfather, is supposed to be 1.082. I'm doing a 30-minute boil on this. I did that kind of to help try to reduce the amount of liquid in the vessel. So if you do a 30-minute boil, less boil off, so less water needed to start to boil. So it looks like that really worked out in my favor because we're everything was maxed out. The liquid was maxed out. I mean, there's no more room in the mash basket for any grain. I can tell you that much for sure. Now is the moment of truth. We are going to pull out the mash basket and see if we can hook it on the side of the kettle. So hopefully everything goes well. I did put my trub trapper underneath of the kettle here to give me a little bit of height to kind of create a little bit of gravity to the pump. So hopefully that doesn't work against me, but I'm gonna have to keep a really close eye on this. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the arm out. Oh, and be careful when you pull the arm out because it will piddle on you. So let this thing drain out a little bit, drop it over here into the sink. And let's see here. I don't remember which side the hooks are on, so that's going to be an interesting one. Okay, looks like the hooks are right there. So here we go. All right, well, that wasn't too bad. And let's see here. See where we are, what we've got as far as about 5.5 gallons when I first pulled it out. So that'll be interesting to see where we wind up at. Oh, let me turn this thing off for a second here. It's telling me that it's close to 170 degrees because when I pulled the basket out, it kind of dropped a little bit. I did also check the mash temperature during the mash recirculation, and I found that it was like, I mean, I probed all around there, and I used a cheapo little Bayou Classic thermometer, so I'm not going to say it's the most accurate, but it was showing about 148, and my mash temperature was hovering around 149 most of the time. So I'm going to say that it's really, really accurate, and that the center pipe dispersing the liquid is keeping that accuracy in there. One of the things I wanted to try to see if I could kind of push on the mash a little bit here, see how the basket held up, and kind of like squeezing the bag a little bit. Some people were kind of questioning whether or not the hooks would hold the basket very well, but I mean, you can kind of see, and I'm not going light on this thing. I'm pushing this thing pretty good. So I'm not seeing the basket flex or the kettle. I'm not concerned, let's put it that way, with what I'm doing here. I don't see any cause for concern at all. So I'm gonna go ahead and push on this a little bit and try to get as much of the liquid out as possible. And I do want to see if I can take a pre-boil gravity reading with my mash hydrometer. By the time I do a transfer into the flask, we'll probably be pretty close to 155 or thereabouts. So, seems like that's working pretty good actually. So, no problems there. We're about 6.5 gallons right there. So I think that's probably going to be about all we need to ask for. I didn't really pay attention to what my Brewfather software said as far as pre-boil volume, but that's got to be pretty close. So let me get the basket out and all that stuff, and then we'll come back and take a gravity reading and see where we are post-boil, and we'll bring it up to a boil and start our 30-minute boil. So see you in just a few minutes. All right, so I got everything out of the kettle, got the mash basket out and everything. Wound up with 6.25 gallons and a gravity of 1.070. Took it with the mash hydrometer. I had optimistically set the mash efficiency, can't say that today, at 70%. It wound up being, according to the calculations that I did in Brewfather, it wound up being about 64%. I'm not 100% surprised by that, just given the amount of the grain and just maxing the system out, because every system like this has a kind of a sweet spot of where they get the maximum efficiency with the certain amount of grain. So this is obviously pushing the system pretty hard, trying to get the maximum grain bill in there as possible. The other thing I will say is I did evidently knock a little bit of grain over into the kettle, because there is just a little bit of grain floating around in here. Nothing really to give me any major concern or anything like that. I'm not, I mean, there's just a few, probably 10, 15 kernels floating around in there, something like that. So nothing to really give me any pause. What I think I'm gonna do, because I actually have more volume than I need, I think I'm actually gonna boil off for a little bit and allow it to get down to about just below 6 gallons before I actually add my hops and then do a 30-minute boil. So I think probably what I'll have to adjust in that is the grain absorption rate, because I think the grain didn't absorb as much of the liquid as I thought it would, or maybe it's because of me squeezing the grain. I don't know for sure, but I'll take a look at it and see what I can figure out as far as that goes. But overall, everything has gone good so far, so we're gonna keep pushing on with the brew day. And I'm gonna boil off some of this and see where I wind up at, and we'll be back here in a little bit once we get the boil started, and we'll go from there. All right, we've come to a boil now and got a little bit of protein break or hot break on the top here. Actually wound up getting a little bit more liquid out of the basket after letting it sit in the bucket for a little bit. Probably, it was about a pint or something like that. So I wound up total volume, I didn't take another gravity reading, but I wound up total volume of about 6.5 gallons. So I am gonna boil off about a half a gallon of that. I think I'll probably be pretty close to the target gravity that I wanted for my recipe. And I'll put a link down in the description for the recipe that I did, and this is by no means a tried and true David Heath recipe. It's just this is a throw it together with what you got recipe. I'm gonna ferment with SO4, the English ale yeast, and I'm gonna use 2 packets just because the gravity should be pretty high. So I need to crank the hood up a little bit because I've definitely got some boil going on here. I am going to let this thing boil for a while. Everything has gone good so far. I think I probably could have gotten a little better efficiency if I had done a sparge with the grains. I kind of wanted to try no sparge because that's kind of the way I think the system really is meant to be. I mean, they haven't said that to me, but you know, it's one of those things where I wanted to kind of use it just as I got it, as it came, without sparging or anything like that. I'm gonna start my boil timer, and we'll be back in a little bit, and I'm not gonna bore you with the whole boil, but we'll see where we are when we get close to the end. We'll take a gravity reading and see where we wound up at. So we'll be back shortly. Whew, that hood is loud, holy crap. So I kind of screwed up a little bit. I dumped the hops in at the beginning of the boil. I was gonna let everything boil down to about 6 gallons and then add the hops. But the Newport hops that I'm actually using are about, I think they're about 2 years old actually. So you know, they lose their bitterness over time. So I'm gonna just leave them in there, call it good. I'm gonna go ahead and boil off. I'm down to like 6 gallons now. I've been boiling at like 85%. 100% was just really like boiling too much. I got a nice rolling boil with 85% right now. So I'm gonna roll with that, and then I'm going to, about 15 minutes or so towards the end of the boil, I'm actually going to run the wort through the Blichmann Therminator and get it all sanitized and everything. And I'm gonna ferment this in the crucible conical with the SO4 yeast. So we'll update you when we get there. I'm kind of curious to see where we wind up gravity-wise. I did pour a little bit of that other extra wort back into the kettle and brought it up to about 6.5 gallons. So we'll be back here in just a little bit whenever I'm ready to start running some wort through the chiller and getting everything ready to go in the fermenter. So far, so good. All right, we are 15 minutes to the end of the boil. It's getting steamy in here. I turned off the fan again. I'm gonna go ahead and open up the valve, and I am going to go ahead and run some wort through our chiller here. Crank on the pump real quick. I think that'll do it to sanitize our chiller. Woo! That gets hot, by the way. I don't know why I did that. All right, so we're gonna let the heat come back up, and obviously that killed our boil, so we're gonna crank it back up to 100%. Bring it back up to a boil, finish out our last 15 minutes, and then I'm probably gonna do a recirculation back into the kettle just because old habits die hard, and I'll chill the whole batch down doing it that way. And then we'll transfer it to fermenter. We'll grab a sample, and I'll just wrap this thing up with a nice little bow and give you my final thoughts on the brew day today with the new Breweasy Compact 5-gallon batch system. So we'll be back here in just a few minutes. Alrighty, we've reached the end of the boil, and I'm gonna go ahead and crank on the water here so we can start chilling this thing down. Woo, gee whiz. Well, that wasn't scripted. Oh my gosh, what happened there? I must have cross-threaded it or something. Wow, that was fun. Good thing I caught that on the video. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and crank on the pump now and start recirculating this a little bit. Cold water coming in this direction, and then the wort going through, so they kind of meet in the middle. On that, this side says wort in, and of course the wort out is on that side, and the water out on this side. So we'll see how quickly she drops, and we'll get a gravity reading. Glad I brought you guys along for the startup of the chiller there, otherwise you'd have missed that nice water fountain there. All right. I'll be back here in just a minute whenever we figure out what the starting gravity is on this beer and see how we did. All right, we'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, so here's how we wound up. I wound up with 5 gallons in the fermenter at 1.080. My expected original gravity was 1.088. So did miss the gravity, but again, like I said, I'm not too upset because I pretty much maxed the basket out on it. I think if I would have held a little bit of liquid back, I would have had a drier mash, but I might have been able to sparge a little bit and maybe get a few more points of gravity, something like that. But you know, when you have these systems completely maxed out with grain, any of the systems like this, you're gonna have a lower expected efficiency. So 64, 65% is pretty good in my opinion. But as far as everything goes, I mean, I had no trouble with the brew day at all. Mashing in was a little bit tricky because of the volumes and everything. But as far as everything else goes, the recirculation arm seemed to work really well. Didn't have any issues with that. Overall, I think I would call the first brew day on it a success. I do want to try to see what the minimum batch size is on it as well. I've got a few ideas with that on how to make that work. So I'm going to try to do another video here pretty soon on the minimum batch size and see how that goes with efficiencies and all that kind of thing. But overall, I think it's a success, and certainly is a interesting offering from Blichmann. I'm anxious to see what the pricing is on it, and depending on the pricing, I think it may be a really good contender for this space. As of right now, I don't know what their plans are for a larger unit, like a 20-gallon system or whatever. But obviously, if there's demand for it, they'll probably do it. So, I appreciate you watching the video. Give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, obviously. This has been Brian for Short Circuited Brewers. We'll see you on the next video.